Have you ever wondered why the Dutch stand, well, head and shoulders above almost everyone else on the planet, literally?
The great question. And yeah, it's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Oh.
We're doing a deep dive into this fascinating, sometimes controversial idea. It's informally called the Netherlands gene.
Right. I've heard that term, not exactly official scientific language, is it?
Not really, no.
Mm.
It's more a shorthand used by, researchers and journalists sometimes. It bundles together genetic patterns seen mainly in people in the Netherlands.
And it gets linked to things like height, obviously, but also physical robustness, reproductive health.
And yes, pretty controversially, even things like cognitive performance.
Okay, so that's our mission today then. Let's try and cut through the noise. Is this genuinely genetics? Or is it more about culture, environment?
Or, is it another case where science gets a bit oversimplified, maybe even, as some of our sources hint, weaponized?
Exactly. We're going to look at the truth, the data, the debates surrounding it all, basically give you a shortcut to being really well informed on this. Let's dive in.
Okay, let's start with the most obvious trait, height. I mean, it's hard to miss. The Dutch are officially the tallest people globally.
The numbers are pretty striking. Men average, what, 183 centimeters? That's 6 feet?
Yeah, and women around 170 centimeters, about 5'7". You definitely notice it if you travel there.
And it's not just about eating well, although I'm sure that helps. There's actual genetic research here.
Well, absolutely. Researchers from places like the University of Groningen and Free University in Amsterdam, they've actually pinpointed specific genetic variations.
Like specific gene markers.
Exactly. Little tweaks on genes with names like HMGA2 and LCORL. These are genes known to be involved in growth regulation.
Okay.
And they found these particular variants are significantly more common in Dutch populations compared to, say, other Europeans.
Interesting. And then there's this idea about selection bias. That sounds
right.
significant.
It really is. What's fascinating is this concept of positive selection bias.
Yeah.
There was a huge long-term study, over 350,000 people involved.
Wow.
And it suggested that, on average, taller Dutch men actually had more biological children.
So the implication is that height itself might have been sort of genetically favored through natural selection, generation after generation.
That's the idea. It suggests a genetic predisposition for tallness might have been passed down more frequently because taller individuals, historically perhaps, had better reproductive success.
So this isn't just some ancient history concept then, positive selection bias. It could be a measurable force, like shaping populations even now.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder that evolution isn't just something locked away in textbooks, it's ongoing.
That is quite a thought.
And this is really important, speaking of factors beyond just the genes.
Right, the nature versus nurture thing.
Precisely. That's where the environment comes in, and frankly, it plays a massive role, maybe even bigger. Our sources, the researchers themselves, really stress this. Environmental factors are equally, if not more, important.
So what kind of factors are we talking about? Diet?
Definitely diet. High-protein, calcium-rich diets, their famous obsession with dairy probably doesn't hurt.
Ah, yeah, all that cheese and milk.
And also excellent prenatal and pediatric care. Really top-notch public health infrastructure.
And stepping back even further, you also see that robust social safety net in the Netherlands. It promotes public health right from birth through adulthood.
Exactly. So you have this potential combination, maybe some favorable genes, and this really optimal environment.
Which could be what's truly fueling this Dutch height phenomenon. It really begs the question, doesn't it? Are we measuring genes here, or are we actually measuring privilege, economic advantage?
It really shifts the perspective when you put it like that.
It does. So if privilege is a factor, how does that thinking extend to something like cognitive ability? That often gets framed as purely innate. Let's move to that next trait, the one that's widely discussed and often sensationalized, cognitive performance.
Right. Some media outlets, maybe jumping the gun a bit, have suggested a kind of genetic edge for Dutch performance in global education rankings or IQ studies.
But the scientific community urges caution there, I gather.
Strongly. Most scientists really caution against leaping to those conclusions. Yes, it's true, the Netherlands consistently ranks very high, top 10 globally in education. And Dutch kids do tend to score above average on international standardized tests, math, reading.
But attributing that directly to genetics is a stretch.
A huge stretch. The consensus is that there's no specific intelligence gene that's exclusive to the Dutch. These impressive results are largely put down to other things.
Like what?
Well, Strong early childhood education programs, for one. Widespread bilingual exposure is another factor often cited.
Okay.
And then there's something called the Flynn effect.
Ah, yes, the Flynn effect. Remind us what that is.
It's this well-documented observation that IQ scores in many parts of the world have actually been rising over generations.
And that's thought to be due to improvements in things like education, nutrition, healthcare, overall living standards.
Exactly. Better conditions lead to better cognitive performance scores over time. It's not about underlying genetics changing rapidly.
So the key takeaway here is, when you hear about national academic performance, look beyond biology, attributing it just to genes risks, ignoring really critical stuff.
Absolutely. Systemic factors, access to quality education, important cultural norms around learning these are huge. Ignoring them is, well, it's bad science and potentially harmful.
Which leads us neatly into the more, shall we say, controversial side of this whole discussion.
Right, because the Netherlands actually has one of Europe's most active genome mapping initiatives. Huge efforts to sequence and understand DNA.
And that's led to good things, right?
Okay.
Medical breakthroughs.
Definitely. Significant advances, especially in understanding rare genetic diseases, metabolic disorders, really valuable work.
Right.
But it also raises ethical alarms, especially when the discussion drifts towards terms like selective advantage or reproductive fitness or, dare I say it, genetic superiority.
Yeah, those phrases have some very heavy, dangerous historical baggage, especially thinking about the history of eugenics discourse in the 20th century, which affected many countries, including the Netherlands.
Precisely. And what's deeply concerning, according to our sources, is that some nationalist groups have actually tried to misappropriate genetic research.
To argue for some kind of ethnic Dutch purity.
Exactly that. Twisting the science to fit a political agenda. It's a classic misuse.
But there's pushback from within the scientific community.
Oh, absolutely. Thankfully, Dutch geneticists, historians too, are actively pushing back. They're emphasizing a really critical principle.
Which is?
Genetics explain variation, not value.
Variation, not value. That's a powerful distinction. It underlines the danger of taking scientific findings out of context, doesn't it? Differences in DNA don't mean inherent superiority or inferiority.
Couldn't have said it better. It's about biological difference, not hierarchical ranking.
That distinction is vital. And it actually leads us perfectly into debunking that whole purity myth even more thoroughly.
Yeah, because recent studies show the Dutch gene pool is, well, anything but uniform or pure. It's actually a fascinating blend, not some fixed blueprint.
So there are differences within the Netherlands itself.
Clear regional genetic differences, actually. You can see distinctions between, say, the northern provinces like Friesland and Groningen compared to southern regions like Limburg and Brabant.
And that's down to history, ancient migrations and influences.
Exactly. Shaped over centuries by different historical events and groups, Viking influence in some areas, Germanic and Celtic migrations, even Roman settlements leaving their mark on the genetic landscape.
And it's not just ancient history either, right? Modern migration plays a role too.
Absolutely. More recent immigration from Indonesia, Suriname, Turkey, Morocco, and elsewhere is actively reshaping Dutch identity and, yes, Dutch genetics in real time.
So this whole idea of a single static Netherlands gene just doesn't hold up.
Not at all. It's dynamic. It's evolving. Just like basically every human population in our increasingly globalized world, it's a melting pot, genetically speaking.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. What's the core message here from our deep dive?
I think the key takeaway is that the story of the Netherlands gene, or rather Dutch population genetics, isn't simply about being tall or strong or doing well in school.
It's about context.
Precisely. It's really a powerful illustration of how genetics constantly interact with culture, with healthcare systems, with economic conditions, and deep history. You can't isolate the genes from everything else.
It's a complex interplay. A reminder, too, that biological traits don't define human value. And maybe that diversity, not purity, is actually the key to a population's resilience and future.
Well said.
Which leaves us, and you, with a final thought to maybe mull over. Does all this genetic research genuinely help us understand ourselves better? Or does it sometimes risk oversimplifying the incredible complexity of what makes us human?
And maybe ask, is the Dutch success story in height and health primarily a genetic blueprint? Or is it perhaps more a reflection of sustained social and economic advantage? A model for others, or a result of specific circumstances?
Something to definitely ponder.